Hello and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering draft video. It's Al here with how to draft MTG, and today we're going to be talking about how to draft green in Innistrad Midnight Hunt. Now, most of you probably know already, blue is the best color, blue-black is the best deck, maybe blue-white is the best deck, but sometimes you got to draft green because blue-black is highly contested these days. Green is one of the weaker colors in Innistrad Midnight Hunt, but I believe there are a couple of ways to draft it viably, so we're going to talk about those today. We are going to try a little bit of a different video format today, so let me know what you think. Hopefully it makes things a little bit easier to see, and of course, if you do enjoy what we're doing here, please click like, please click subscribe. It does help the channel a huge amount. See you in a second. So first, I just want to shout out a few places that I've gathered some of this information from, being the Limited Resources podcast, Limited Level Ups podcast, Drafting Archetypes podcast, as well as using data from 17lands.com. So please do check out and support all of those places. They're super awesome and helpful and really fun. And I've coupled that data and information along with my own experience and analysis to come up with a thought process and to draw some conclusions about how to draft and utilize the green cards in Innistrad Midnight Hunt. So first, let's start by looking at the win rates of each two-color green archetype. According to 17 Lands, the green-based deck win rates are as follows. Blue-green at 58.2%, white-green at 57.6%, black-green at 54.9%, and red-green at 51.7%. Now, the average win rate of a two-color deck in Innistrad Midnight Hunt among 17 Lands users is 56.8%, which shows that mostly above-average players are using 17 Lands. Therefore, even though black-green and red-green have above 50% win rates, I believe they should both be heavily avoided as their win rates are significantly below the average of 56.8. There are enough playable archetypes in this format that we should never have to end up in either of these color pairs. Therefore, if we're drafting green, we're drafting blue-green or white-green. So, how are winning versions of these archetypes built? Well, first, let's focus on the signpost uncommons, as we will theoretically be getting past these if blue-green or white-green is open in the draft. So the first signpost uncommon we'll look at is Winterthorn Blessing. This is the green-blue sorcery that puts a +1/+1 counter on one of your creatures and freezes one of theirs, flashes back for 1 green-blue. This is a card that wants to play in an aggro tempo style deck. So a deck where you are playing creatures early, attacking your opponents, and then eventually swinging the game in your favor and winning by locking down 1 or 2 of their creatures and buffing 1 or 2 of your own. So this does not really want to play in a control style deck, as the longer the game goes on, the less likely this is to have a window of opportunity where it can kill your opponent. So the next signpost uncommon is Root Coil Creeper. Green-blue for a 2/2, taps for mana of any color, or 2 mana to cast a spell from a graveyard, and it can fetch a flashback card you own from exile and put it into your hand. So this looks like a big ramp creature, which it kind of is, and it looks like a late game creature, which it kind of is, because it can get a flashback card you own late in the game and sort of loop your deck and all that kind of stuff. But I actually think this plays totally fine in an aggro shell, as a 2-mana 2/2 is relevant in the early game. It can attack for damage, and it also ramps out your 4-mana plays, like your Shadow Beast sightings, or something from your graveyard, like maybe a Gale Drifter, a little ahead of schedule. So I think this card, while it does play well in the long game, it also plays well in an aggro game. Looking at Dawnheart Wardens next, 1 green-white for 3/3 Vigilance with Coven. It gives creatures you control +1/+0 until end of turn. So obviously this is an aggressive card, and it wants you to go wide by playing a bunch of creatures to enable Coven, and then of course take advantage of the pump ability that it has. And finally, Join the Dance, green-white for sorcery, makes 2 1/1 white human creature tokens, flashes back for 5 mana. Another card that wants you to be aggressive and makes multiple bodies and wants you to attack with your creatures. So amongst these signpost uncommons, we're seeing a trend towards aggressive decks. Next, we want to look at the top commons in the archetype, as these are the cards we will see most often draft in and draft out. So if we look at the top 5 green commons from 17 Lands game in hand win rate for blue-green, we've got Eccentric Farmer, Harvest Tide Sentry, Shadow Beast Sighting, Duel for Dominance, and Might of the Old Ways. In terms of the white-green deck, we see the exact same 5 commons, with 2 and 3 being flipped. So where and how do these cards play best? Well, if we look at Eccentric Farmer, this is a solid 3-drop in any deck. It specifically wants you to play with Flashback and Disturb, but you're going to put it in your deck kind of no matter what. Harvest Tide Sentry is an aggressive 2-drop, and it wants you to play a lot of creatures early in order to enable its Coven ability. Shadow Beast Sighting is a solid aggro curve topper as a 4-mana 4/4. Can also be milled for value, but that's very slow. Paying 7 mana for a 4/4 with no evasion that is vulnerable to bounce and Revenge of the Drowned is pretty risky, so that should not be our main plan with the card. And finally, Duel for Dominance and Might of the Old Ways are both cards that are not very good without Coven, therefore they're asking you to play a lot of creatures early. So, among the Signpost Uncommons and top green commons, there is mostly support for an aggro game plan in both decks, being blue-green and blue-white, and very little support for a control or mid-range game plan. Alright, so now let's look at each color pair individually. How does green best synergize with blue? In my opinion, blue-green should be built like blue-white, which is an aggro deck based on disturbed creatures. Winterthord Blessing gives you an element of tempo, meaning we are able to slow our opponent's game plan while accelerating our own, and we gain access to more incidental self-mill through Eccentric Farmer. So a card like Covetous Castaway, for example, becomes better as we will more often get it in the graveyard. This is something that blue-white actually struggles with, even though it's quite a strong deck. You don't have a lot of ways to incidentally put your disturbed creatures in your yard, aside from Devoted Graphkeeper and Shipwreck Sifters, so blue-green actually has a leg up in this particular instance. The top 5 blue commons for this deck are Revenge of the Drowned, Oregon Hoarder, Shipwreck Sifters, Flip the Switch, and Falcon Abomination. Now, Baithook Angler is an important piece of the deck, as it gives us value with Eccentric Farmer and Oregon Hoarder, as well as Shipwreck Sifters, and helps to enable Coven for Harvest Tide Sentry because it has 1 power on its backside. All this being said, it's still Blue's usual top commons performing the best as they're such excellent rates, so don't pick Baithook Angler too highly, but once you're in this deck, I think it's an excellent piece to have. Larder Zombie is also worth picking up a copy of in order to interact with our decayed tokens. If we can get Scab Wrangler, even better. If we have nothing in our deck that interacts with our decayed tokens, then we're looking for situations where we can cash them in for 2 damage just by attacking. So if you have a chance to get in for 2, take it. Finally, let's take a look at the top uncommons, which are a high priority, but will not always be seen in the draft. The following blue uncommons are high picks for any deck and perform well in blue-green. These are Scab Wrangler, Overwhelmed Archivist, Nebelgast Intruder, and Fading Hope. The following green uncommons perform well in blue-green and will pull us in that direction during the draft. These are Rise of the Ants, Death Bonnet Sprout, Dawnheart Mentor, and Clear Shot. Past these top commons and uncommons, we're looking for aggressive creatures, combat tricks, interaction, and cards that we want to mill with our Organ Hoarders and Eccentric Farmers, such as Hound Tamer, Outland Liberator. These are just solid early plays that will pressure your opponent. Startle, which is a pretty good interactive spell. Silverbolt, which is again a pretty solid removal spell, as this deck does not always have good access to removal. Gale Drifter, which is not a great card, but if you mill it, you're kind of happy, and if you have space in your deck, you'll put this in there. And Tapping at the Window, kind of the same thing. Not a card you want a ton of copies of, but if you end up with a couple, and you have a lot of ways to mill it incidentally, and you have enough creatures in your deck, it will play pretty well for you. Alright, now let's look at how green best synergizes with white. White-green is an aggro deck that wants to go wide by playing multiple creatures to enable Coven and maximize the effects of cards like Dawnheart Wardens. Green's cards pair well with white's core of aggressive commons. Here are the top 5 white commons for white-green. These are Gavany Trapper, Lunarch Veteran, Blessed Defiance, Search Party Captain, and Candle Grove Witch. White is quite deep at common, so green will often act more as a support color. I've found this deck to want 3 to 5 combat tricks, especially if I'm short on interaction, so don't be afraid to play something like Flare of Faith or Ritual of Hope if you haven't picked up any combat tricks in your draft. Here are the top white uncommons in white-green. You're going to pick these highly either way, but they do work well in the deck. Ambitious Farmhand, Gavany Dawnguard, Dual Craft Trainer, and Borrowed Time. And here are the top green uncommons for white-green, and these will actually pull you into the deck, especially if you're seeing them a little bit later in the draft. These are Dawnheart Mentor, Rise of the Ants, Hound Tamer, Clear Shot, and Contortionist Troop. In terms of filling out the rest of the deck, white has a lot of solid options at common. You've got Gavany Silversmith, Clarion Cathars, Soul Guide Gryff, even Candletrap, which I generally don't recommend playing. We can play it if we need interaction. Finally, Morning Patrol can get you some value off of your eccentric farmers and is a decent 3-drop if that's what you need. All right, here are some general deck building tips for both blue-green and white-green. The decks are actually quite similar to each other, even though in the history of Magic, these two color pairs have a bit of a different texture to them. As you can see, there's mostly just aggro support for these decks, even though blue-green plays a little bit more of a ramp tempo game. So both decks are going to want to play about 16 to 18 creatures, 7 to 8 of which we want to be 1 or 2 mana to cast. This is very important. This format is defined by getting on board early and putting pressure on your opponents, being the aggressor. So make sure you have 7 to 8 1 or 2 mana creatures in probably any of your decks, but especially in these blue-green and white-green decks. I would recommend against playing more than 3 cards that cost 5 mana or more. The games just don't go long enough that you need to draw multiple top-end creatures, and there are a lot of ways to spend your mana later into the game with things like Disturb, Flashback, activated abilities on your creatures, so really be careful with how many expensive cards you're including in your decks. 1 copy of Evolving Wilds is going to be excellent in either deck, so take the first one pretty highly, maybe under the 4th or 5th best common for either archetype. It'll also help you stay open in the early portion of the draft. And finally, play 17 lands. As we said, there's a lot of ways to spend your mana late into the game in this format, so usually you're okay with hitting most of your land drops. You can get away with 16 lands in white-green if you don't have any cards that cost more than 4 mana. So look at what's going on in your pool and make a decision based on that. All right, and finally, let's talk a little draft navigation. Ideally, we want to start in blue or white, not green, as these colors lead to more potential archetypes. We want our card pool to be mostly blue or mostly white, and then to support that color with the good green cards. If we are taking a green card early, it should be one of the top uncommons that performs well in both blue-green and white-green, specifically Rise of the Ants and Dawnheart Mentor. Or it could be a truly excellent rare such as Wrenn and Seven or Tovalar's Huntmaster. If we are seeing Eccentric Farmer, which is the best green common, in picks 9 through 15, this could be an indicator that no one else is drafting green and we should move in, especially if we're already deep on blue or white, as those colors obviously pair well with green, or if we have yet to find our lane in the draft, this could be an indication that we should move into green. All right, that's going to do it for this one. I hope you found this video enjoyable. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, please click like and subscribe, as it does help the channel a whole lot. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this new format, or if you prefer the old format, or if you have any general feedback for the channel, or if you have any questions. As always, you can follow me on Twitter. It's twitter.com/howtodraftmtg. And we'll see you very soon for the next video. Good luck in your drafts. Bye for now.